Good evening, everybody. It is 9 o'clock, and I was struggling with some camera and microphone difficulties, so I'm going to wait for everybody to get on and make sure that everybody can hear me and see me okay. Decided to work at 8:59 as soon as I was about to go live. So when everybody gets on, tonight we're going to talk about how to recognize the signs and symptoms, or the signs of anxiety in children. And I came up with a nice list that basically the most common things that we see in the office and what parents bring to my attention, and some things that we can do to help children with anxiety and learn how to cope with these symptoms and what they look like. So until someone lets me know that they can hear me, I will just wait another second or so. Lots of people are jumping on. I think we had like over 115 people interested in this event. So it's going to be a busy one, I have a feeling, with lots of questions. So we'll do our best to answer as much as we can before the end of the evening. All right. Can everybody hear me okay? Can somebody comment something? Somebody, anybody? Courtney, Maya, anybody? Can somebody hear me? Can somebody say something? All right, Tori, thank you. It's just everybody was joining and no one was letting me know that they can hear me. All right, cool. So, sorry, I'm gonna move this. All right, so like I said, tonight I compiled a list of basically everything that I find to be the most common signs of anxiety and how to recognize those in our children. So right now we're seeing a lot of kiddos that are coming in from the struggle at the beginning of the school year. So when we start school, a lot of the kindergartners, our middle school children, and a lot of our high school kids tend to be the biggest struggle that we see. And why is that? Well, they're adapting to new environments, new schools, new people. The kindergartners are going from preschool to now all day, new school, new teachers, new people, just as they got acclimated in preschool. It's like a big switch for them. And then our middle schoolers are going from the big man on the totem pole to the low man on the totem pole going into 6th grade. Sometimes they're switching schools and they're having to adapt to that. And then same with our freshmen. They're going from that big man on the totem pole to the low man on the totem pole. And that's okay, and change is okay. And so we try to reiterate to these children that, change is okay, and we're gonna have to deal with change the rest of our lives. And so what can we do to help them to succeed in the best way possible? And it's teaching them how to cope. It's giving them the coping skills to get through that and to make sure that everything is doing everything up to par, I guess you can say, and that they're able to learn these tasks and they're able to get through every situation a little bit easier and a little bit better. And is one coping skill going to work for every child? Absolutely not. So again, the big focus of our practice is how to individualize care plans for kids and to make sure that everybody has a special plan for them. Last week I had a young child and we sat and we talked for a good amount of time where we were able to customize a plan that worked for her, and we used her to guide the plan. So through every step of the way I figured out what her triggers were, what her anxiety triggers were, and then how we could help her to benefit, to make sure that she could get through her school day just a little bit easier, and allow her to not suffer as bad as she was just the day prior. So I think most of us as adults can definitely say that we've experienced anxiety at one point in our lives. And some of us still do. And I'll admit that I am definitely more of an anxious person at times, and probably more when it comes to my children, which you wouldn't think that's the case. But I'm a mother before I'm a provider. So I don't think like a provider when it comes to my children. I think like a mother. So I'm the one who's reaching out to my peers and my colleagues when there's something wrong with my child to get that reassurance. And that's really important to recognize, is that what we deal with as adults, these children deal with just the same, but they don't know how to cope with it, and they don't know how to deal with it as, I guess, well, or cover it up as well as we do as adults. Sometimes as adults, we have learned different coping mechanisms, if it's from counselors, therapists, psychiatrists, or just even our friends, venting, getting out, talking with people. And for children, they tend to close off. And so it's teaching them to be able to speak to us and understand and get us to help them. And if they don't talk to us, we can't help them. So that's the relationship that we build in the office, is to discuss that together to make sure that we are all on the same page, that they can trust me as a provider, and you guys as a parent to help build this best plan as possible. So the first step is really, as parents, is to recognize that there's an issue. Many people don't recognize anxiety as a problem, and they'll just say, oh, they're just anxious, or they just worry too much. They always fidget, or they always tend to be quiet in these situations. And that's okay. We have bashful kids. I have a 3-year-old who's extremely bashful and shy. And does that mean that he's struggling? No, not necessarily. And so a lot of personality comes into play with that too, but it's recognizing the difference between that. So the first step is to know that they can't always do this for themselves. And it's imperative as their parents to watch for their symptoms. So we're going to talk now about the 7 most common things that I came up with that I see in the office to allow you to recognize maybe some changes in your child that maybe need some addressing. So the first thing that I tend to see, or that can happen with children, is changes in sleeping patterns. Whether it's getting enough sleep, not being able to fall asleep at night, struggling, 2, 3, 4 hours to get to sleep. And a lot of parents say they're up till midnight and they still can't fall asleep. Sometimes we get into that middle school, high school age where there's so much homework that they're up till 10, 11 o'clock, which is a completely different subject, and I don't feel needs to be the case for most of these kids. But besides that, most of these children that are suffering from anxiety can also have some changes in their sleep patterns. So it's just making sure, they're not just laying there awake for hours on end. And there's times that I'll talk to them like, how are they sleeping at night? And the parents will say, oh, they're sleeping fine. And then the child's like, no, I have a problem falling asleep. And they're almost afraid to tell their parents that they're having issues falling asleep or staying asleep because they don't want to get in trouble. Or they're afraid that they're going to be reprimanded for struggling with the sleep issue, when really there's some things that we can help give them, or help to teach them to cope with these issues in the evening time so that they don't struggle to fall asleep. Some kids are more on the opposite end, where they are more just wound up. And so they cope with it a little bit different in terms of not completely shutting down, but completely winding up. Now, all of us have dealt with children who, right when we say it's bedtime, they've got million-mile-per-hour energy. And that's not what I'm referring to. It's a different type of wound up, more where they have to do this, and they have to do this, and they have to check this again, and they have to go put this away. And they almost kind of like try to find tasks to do, versus just being crazy and wound up and jumping all over the bed and not wanting to go to sleep and being severely hungry and thirsty, and having to go to the bathroom 25 times. That's just a kid. That's just a toddler. That's whatever the case is. The being wound up is just a little bit different, where they're more fixated on different tasks that can really be struggling in terms of not them wanting to fall asleep. Again, I see a lot of this with the smaller kids, and then the transitional kids as well, our middle schoolers, our high schoolers. And a lot of it's more common in girls, and anxiety is actually more common in girls. And it's something just to be aware of. And I think that the difference from when, I was a child, I still remember the bullies, and I still remember, the picking on and stuff like that. But I feel like it's a lot harder on girls, especially now these days, compared to how it was when we were kids. So as parents, we just really need to be aware of what's going on. And we have to realize that there's a lot of kids in these schools, and there's one counselor or one person to help them, or one teacher, and that one person can't do all of the watching over. And so it's our jobs as parents and providers to recognize these symptoms and catch them early. Number 2 is eating more or less. So some kids completely tend to binge eat, where they'll eat, and they'll not necessarily eat a ton at school because they'll be a little bit more nervous at school or not want anybody to watch them at school. but they'll come home and take over and eat everything. Or they come home and they say, no, they're not really hungry, or they're coming home with basically an empty lunchbox or whatever the case is. So it can go a little bit either way. It's not necessarily a sign of an eating disorder per se, but some parents will think that that's maybe the case, that they have an eating disorder, because you'll notice some weight loss, and then you'll also worry just about some weight gain. And it's going to start more so in this age group. We start to see it middle school, where they're realizing that food is the connection. When they're little, they always want to eat. Like I said, I mean, those toddlers are constantly wanting to eat every single thing in sight, and you just don't know what they're going through a growth spurt or if they just want to eat. But as we get into that middle school, high school age, they're able to use food more as a coping mechanism. And so that's how the early signs of obesity develop, and a lot of emotional dysregulation. And so it's really important to recognize those signs early so that it doesn't turn into a mental illness of an eating disorder, or having that association poorly with food. And again, when we talk about these things, it's not necessarily like all of a sudden they have anxiety. There could be way more to it. We're just focusing on anxiety for this talk, and here's some different things that you can address or look into as a parent to make sure that there's nothing else that you're missing. The third thing is quietness. So some of those kiddos are really chatty Cathys, and they'll tell you about their entire day. And those kids you probably don't have to worry about as much. A specific situation that I'm more referring to is your child that comes home from school and you're trying to ask about their day and they don't want to talk about it. They go home and they go right up to their room. And they're closing that door and they're completely shut down. That should be a big red flag as a parent. Something's obviously up. Their mind is obviously rolling. And it's more like, what happened in school today? And again, a lot of these kids are afraid to open up because they're afraid that you're going to say something to the school, say something to the counselor, say something to the other child. And then what's going to happen if they're getting bullied or whatever the case is, they're afraid it's going to come back on them. And then they're going to get in trouble, or they're going to get picked on more. So they're almost afraid to do that. So again, it's just having that open relationship with them and just making sure that they really understand the importance of that, and that they're not going to get in trouble, but you can't help them as a parent if they don't open up to you as well. So that trust is so, so important. It's also teaching them, to learn who they are without pressuring them or forcing them to talk to you. So again, it's giving them, I'm here when you need me. I'm going to come back in 5 minutes. I'm going to let you kind of hang out for 5 minutes. And then I'm going to come back and we're going to have to talk about this, because my job as a parent is to help you. And if I can't help you, then we're not going to get anywhere. So it's just really important to kind of stay on track and just make sure that we're really paying attention to those things. The fourth thing, is going to be changes in behavior. So again, you're going to be the first person to recognize changes in behavior. I have many parents that just bring their child in, with random changes, and they're not sure what's wrong, but the child's just not acting themselves. So as their provider, we're really trying to hone in on what the issue is. And these could be from anything from, physical signs to mental signs. Some kids will just constantly complain about different things, and we'll talk about that in number 7. But it's just recognizing those changes. And again, I keep reinforcing the same thing, because again, we are the children's first step. So we are the first people to recognize that and know them more than anybody else. It's like when schools call and they say, we have a problem with Johnny, and he's having struggles with X, Y, and Z, but then at home you guys don't see any of that. Home is the safe place. Home is the place that matters. So if there's not an issue at home, then there's probably something at school that needs to be addressed, because there's obviously that little bit of discrepancy that's really causing that child to struggle. So again, it's just paying attention to that type of stuff. Number 5 is not wanting to do things. So a lot of children are very engaged, right? They want to participate in events. They want to participate in activities, extracurricular activities, school outings, school events. And when they're not wanting to do things, that should be a sudden red flag as well. So they tend to pull away. And it really can be something that's a sudden change. And when that happens, that there was probably a common event. Sometimes it can be a drastic change. or a drastic, well, not a drastic change, sorry. It could be a prolonged change where, they were fine in the beginning of the school year, but by the second semester, whatever the case is, they're just not wanting to participate in that activity anymore. Now, again, is that always a sign of anxiety? No, not necessarily. That could just be more change in behavior, due to personality change or due to wanting to do something else. So as long as you're not seeing it as something that's a red flag and you're noticing that's probably more normal for your child, then I wouldn't worry a whole lot about it. But there's patterns in behavior that's going to clue you into what's causing that anxiety, and that's what we're trying to discuss so that you guys can recognize at home. So definitely paying attention to not wanting to do things like going to school or extracurricular activities. If your child once loved school or even didn't love school, but then they're suddenly saying they don't want to go, and that's a problem, we need to look into why they don't want to go. And again, they don't always want to open up to you about that. And the schools will say, oh, we haven't heard anything. Johnny's doing great. He's social in class. And a lot of the times that's the case because they don't want that report back to their parents. The teachers and the counselors and whatever, they're going to be the first people to go back to their parents and say, Johnny was not participating today. He's really reserved. He's really quiet. He doesn't want to talk about things. So a lot of these kids will try to put on an act for everybody else so that they don't have to be looked down upon, but then they'll kind of hold it all in, and that's what we're trying to avoid and recognize as parents. Number 6 kind of ties into 4 and 5 a little bit with not wanting to do things and changes in behavior, but it's spending more time alone. So children who are suffering from anxiety tend to resort to a safe place. So again, is it their bedrooms, their den, wherever they feel comfortable, wherever they feel safe. It's normal for them to want to seek out space of their own, just as we do as adults. We all need our space, and we all just need like a couple minutes to ourselves, and it's okay. And it's okay for our tantrum toddler to be like, you know what, go take a few minutes, regroup, come back, whatever the case is. But again, it's repetition. So if they're every day coming home and going up to their room and sitting there for 30 minutes or plus, and they're not wanting to do anything, they're not wanting to come down for dinner, they're not wanting to go play outside, they're not wanting to play with their brother and sister, or play even a game that they wanted to play, that's important to recognize. And everything that they used to like almost becomes a chore. So they start to be mean to their parents and mean to their brothers and sisters and not like those games anymore, not like those activities, not want to go ride their bike. And they don't do it out of being mean, they do it out of not knowing how to cope with their feelings, and they build up everything inside. And there's some children that you really cannot get to express their feelings to you, and that's okay. Again, it's just slowly building that into them and not making them sit down and tell them everything. Because if you try to sit them down and make them tell you everything they're feeling, there's a lot of times they're going to lie to you because they're just not comfortable and they feel like you want a quick answer. So the sooner that we can sit down and let them take their time is really important. With the spending more time alone, I always say, to parents, well, it's okay to let them go upstairs when they come home and sit there and give them a time. So if it's 30 minutes that you feel it's enough for them to regroup and kind of come back, after that long day, that's fine. But then, especially my middle schooler and high school kids, I want them to journal. I talk about journaling so often, and I want them to talk about, a couple things, like 3 things that stressed them out during the day, that didn't go right, that made them anxious, that they did not like. But then they need to follow it up with 3 things of gratitude. So 3 things that went well, that, they helped somebody else helped them, a positive experience. So we can always do 3 negatives, that's fine. And I always say 3 because it gives them enough to kind of prioritize in terms of what they feel is the most important. But then they also need to follow up with the 3 positives, because that's how our brain thinks. Our brain heals on gratitude, and our brain thrives off of gratitude and being a positive thing. And it's a huge organ that really controls a lot of our body and our anxiety. And we'll talk a little bit about like our hormones and stuff in a minute. But journaling really helps them. And so a lot of the boys roll their eyes at me and they're like, oh, the moms are like, see, I told you, she said journaling too. So again, it's just making sure that they do that. And I always say these are journals that you don't have to share with anybody. And I tell parents to try to respect that as well, because these kids feel safe doing that. And if you have a concern about your child about something that you feel like you need to look into their journal for, then that's something that you guys need to kind of keep an open thing. I would never recommend going behind their back if you're telling them that you're not going to look. Just let them know, hey, I may check your journal periodically just to make sure you're okay if you guys feel like you're going to do that. Alrighty, number 7. This is one of the biggest things that we see in kids with anxiety, which is why I left it for last. And that's stomach aches and headaches. So again, having anxiety is natural and we all have it. I absolutely can't stand pushing go on these live videos. I get anxious for like the first 30 seconds and then it's gone. But you know, with these kids, a lot of them will feel anxious and we think, oh my gosh, that's a problem. No, as people, as humans, we ultimately will always have that fear at some point. Tonight, my daughter was in a pageant and the entire way to the pageant, I kept telling her, having her repeat different things. And I had her say like, I am good, I am beautiful, I am strong, I am brave. And then I said, I am calm. And she goes, I am not calm. And she started yelling and she's like, I am so nervous. There's going to be so many people. I'm going to have to look at so many people. And I said, no, you find me in the crowd and you look at me and you pay attention to me. But again, it was just more like making it like have fun, be happy with it. It doesn't have to be a serious matter. And there's times that we do have to be serious, you know, when it comes to test taking or whatever the case is. But even as somebody who went through grad school, you know, 8 years of schooling total, and when I got to grad school, I was still so anxious taking tests. And with grad school, you're doing tests on the computer with a camera on you. I mean, it's a nightmare. So I was always freaking out even before taking those tests. So, you know, these children have a lot more pressure and they have a lot more disruptions in their emotional regulation because they haven't learned all those coping mechanisms yet as we have as adults. So it's really important just to make sure that they understand all of that and they know that it is okay and it is normal to have these anxieties. Just like children being afraid of the dark, I wrote down a couple things. Being nervous to take a test, being nervous for their first soccer game. But again, when it becomes more serious is when they're afraid to leave your side, when they need to sleep alone or to be reassured over events constantly. They may complain like every morning before a stomach ache before school or body aches before school or a headache before school, or they get pulled into the nurse's office halfway through the day for a stomach ache or for a headache or whatever the case may be. And that's something that's a red flag. And a lot of these school nurses and school counselors have determined that as an issue and they'll let you know. So they'll say, hey, so-and-so, you know, Johnny has been coming into the office, you know, a few times a week or is constantly telling me they have a headache or a stomach ache. This is something you should probably follow up with your provider on. And so we see that a ton. And so while there's other issues to the stomach ache, most of the time, it's more of an anxiety issue, but this is the most common thing we see is these headaches and stomach aches. And it's just because their body, they just don't know how to cope with these things. Some kids will get diarrhea. Some kids just have that constant upset stomach. They don't want to eat. They sometimes get nauseous. Sometimes they'll vomit depending on the severity of the anxiety. And again, those are things that we need to address. And so we develop an individualized care plan for every child based on what's going on. Sometimes we even do blood work in the office, which gets billed right through your insurance. And we're determining, you know, is there a mineral deficiency? Is there a vitamin deficiency? Is there something in their diet that's really messing with them? And then we develop that care plan, which includes different supplements and includes diet and includes chiropractic care. And we work really closely with several chiropractors, but one particularly in the area that we refer to where they can scan the child, where they can check that nervous system and they can make sure that everything is up to par. Because when our nervous system's not working, I'm the first to be able to talk about, you know, my story with that, because I will suddenly feel like my heart's racing and you know, I kind of just feel more anxious and I'll check my watch and my heart rate's a little bit higher. And so I know that it's time for me to get adjusted and I'll go in and they'll adjust me. And like my vasovagal nerve is just always a little bit off. And so as soon as I get adjusted, there's a huge relief and a huge pressure off my shoulders. And so again, it's just checking these children's nervous system just to make sure that everything is up to par. And so is that everybody's issue? No, but it's a huge benefit for emotional regulation and nervous system development and just making sure that everything is good with the nervous system is chiropractic care. So the biggest, again, one of the biggest parts of this talk is determining the difference between normal worry and anxiety issues. And so again, every child, every person, every human is going to worry at some point. And so is it more, do we have to check these boxes of the 7 things to kind of see? And I can, for those tuning in, we talked about changes in sleeping patterns, eating less or more, quietness, changes in behavior, not wanting to do things, spending more time alone, and then the stomach aches and headaches are just a few things that we can talk about with that. So, you know, we don't want this to interfere with the child's everyday living. So if every morning they're struggling to get up to go to school and they're fearful, or if every night they're struggling to fall asleep because they're fearful, that's what we have to address. And so again, it's coming in, it's scheduling that appointment, it's coming up with the individualized care plans, and it's figuring out exactly what's going on with that child so that we can help them to the best that we can. You know, anxiety affects about 3 to 5% of the youth. And it can look in terms of OCD. It can be more separation anxiety or social anxiety. It doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, anxiety of like the stomach aches and the headaches and all these different things, but it doesn't have to be just going to school. It doesn't have to be just before a play, but it's just general things. So obsessions, like I said, the child has to do 17 different things before bed to make sure everything's in order, because that's more of an anxious behavior of being OCD, to be able to, you know, focus on that. So what's causing those behaviors? Why these sudden changes? Figuring out the root cause, figuring out the triggers. Again, very, very important. And it's definitely very tricky for the parent to recognize because they have a tough time expressing what's inside. So again, that's why they complain of a tummy ache, or that's why they have the issue with the sleep or the changes in the behavior, because they feel being quiet sometimes is just the best option. And we can't allow that to be the case. We need to be their advocates. We need to speak up for them. We need to take care of them, and we need to teach them how to be the best that they can be, so that they can do exactly what they want to do in this world and not struggle or feel like they are struggling, because that is the worst feeling in the world. And every adult, if you say that you've never felt that way, it's a lie, because truly we've all felt that way in many, many situations. And it's okay to be anxious, but it's okay to know that we have to take a deep breath sometimes and just go and give it our all, and then sit back and watch it all unfold. And that's what we need to teach our kids. We talked about responding to anxiety triggers for like survival mode. So again, if this becomes to a point where it's fight or flight, and I was kind of writing down, when the fight or flight is activated, it increases our adrenaline in our bloodstream, and it causes our body to release other hormones, and that all affects the brain. And it's this whole circle, and it's just the circle that never ends, and it's this vicious cycle. But where can we stop it? Where can we break that circle and say, hey, we need to teach our child how to deal with these coping mechanisms just a little bit easier, or just, you know, one more step, or take one thing away from them that's causing them to be so anxious. That chemical disruption is what leads to like them just being withdrawn, and stomach and bowel complaints, and the shortness of breath, or that pain in their chest, or the heaviness. And again, it's just paying attention to those things. I had a patient that the school thought that he had like exercise-induced asthma, because every time in gym he would have this shortness of breath while performing in gym. But then the more that I talked to him, and we did testing and we did workup, it wasn't with just running, it was with anything. And so come to find out, he was being bullied in the locker room. So this child, and it was only during gym, so this child was being bullied in the locker room, but then was causing these symptoms that he could have just went to a pulmonologist or a different primary for, been put on an inhaler and told this is your solution. It wasn't even close to the solution. So we helped to find that solution, and we gave him the coping skills that he needed to feel like he could succeed going through that class. We made the teachers aware, we made the counselors aware, so they could watch, because they don't always see all this stuff. And if our children don't tell us, or they're not receptive to that, then we can't help them. So we really try to hone in on the problem and what's causing it. And like I said, this child would have just been given a bronchodilator inhaler and been told his symptoms and his life was going to get better, when truly that wasn't the case. Excuse me. Alrighty, so again, I think take-home point is just knowing that anxiety can be very treatable, and it can definitely, we can learn as parents to really hone in on the triggers and the causes of the anxiety. There's many tools that will help your child learn how to deal with these things. And again, if it's referring to a counselor sometimes, or a behavioral therapist, that does help a ton. I have students that check in with the counselor at school like once a week, or sometimes once a day, just depending on what's going on and the severity. I have parents that, you know, the students will go to the nurse and they check in with the child, like the parents call the child every day at lunch, just to kind of help them get through their day and see how things are going. So there's definitely other steps that can go with that, but that's what's coming with making that individualized care plan. So if the counseling, the supplements, the blood work, the CBD oil, the chiropractic care, all of it is evolved together, and all of it is used to determine the best care plan for your child. the issue with having anxiety that's untreated is that it will lower confidence and it will lower self-esteem. It'll cause academic dysfunction. It's going to eventually cause self-medication through substance abuse, or medication through psychiatrists, or whatever the case may be. And these symptoms are going to continue to be ongoing, but yet it's going to domino affect tons of other things that's going to affect your child's life. So again, we just want you to know that you're not alone and that we're here to help you. And that I think that you guys need to learn too that you're not alone. And so I can tell you you're not alone, but there's tons of people that have watched this video that I guarantee have had some sort of experience that they can share with you, or with their child, that we can learn, and we can learn how to teach our children how to cope a little bit, because that transition period is just so important to determine, the best, I guess, treatment plan or the best mechanism of action to help our children. So I will leave it open to questions here for a little bit. If anybody has anything. Someone said there's a lag in the video. I'm not sure how long the lag is, but I guess we'll find out here. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. And if you're a little bit embarrassed to ask on here, that's okay. I mean, we can definitely schedule an appointment for your child and talk with them and develop an individualized care plan and figure out what the best way is, if it's going to be developing a care plan in the office, or if it's going to be referring you to a specialist that can help you just a little bit easier, a little bit better. That's one thing that, we aren't afraid to discuss, is that we know that there's not a one size fits all, and that we aren't just the only person that needs to be individual, working on your child together. There's multiple disciplinary teams, like I said, the counselors, behavior therapists, psychiatrists, chiropractors, functional medicine physicians. There's so many different people that we all work as a team, and we work as a community, and we're really trying to hone in on what the cause is and how we can maximize your child's life. Alrighty, so I don't see anything coming in. So if you guys have any questions, like I said, don't hesitate to schedule an appointment. Don't hesitate to comment on here if you want. I'll try to answer questions as I can. You guys can always email us as well. And if anybody has any other concerns, I mean, feel free again to ask. It doesn't have to be anxiety related, but maybe if you're not sure if this is a symptom of anxiety or this is something that's going on, I definitely recommend coming into the office so that we can determine that, finding that root cause of not just thinking it's anxiety, but maybe there potentially is a stomach issue or a head issue, or an issue with growth when we're struggling with weight loss, weight gain, and things like that. So it's not just thinking, oh, these are anxiety, when really we need to rule out the medical part of it too. So, all right, thank you everybody for tuning in and listening to me speak. If anybody has any concerns or questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Have a great night. Bye-bye.